In my opinion, 2024 was a pretty interesting year for video games. I went in only expecting 2 games and I ended up playing neither. The first half of the year was really dry and then companies realized they actually could have released video games and then proved to us that Metroid Prime 4 has actually been in development and they hadn't been faking it for the past 10 years. Although I think this year has had some of the absolute dumbest discourse the medium has experienced in quite a while. Now DLC is getting nominated for Game of the Year, and a game that came out this year is getting nominated for Best Ongoing. I can't even with this anymore. People are mad at IGN for the 85th time for an opinion that was pretty reasonably presented, all things considered. Discord mods got mad after finding out that Asian women are attractive, but they also call having any non-basic body type woke. For the record, I'm pretty sure that's not how that word works. Microsoft has had more studios shut down than games released this year, so who even knows what's going on with this industry anymore? For now, though, I actually came up with a far more interesting idea to round off the year. We're gonna go back in time 30 years all the way to 1994. To me, one of the best years in gaming history. It was one of the times that I felt the craft had been stepped up, and every company was releasing hits that at the time were groundbreaking or massive improvements on what came before and have stood the test of time as genre-defining titles even today. This is something that I've even noticed in my time. I've been interested in retro games for a long time, and even then as a young kid I noticed how many of the best Genesis and SNES games seemed to come out in 1994. With it now being exactly 3 decades since then, I wanted to count down what my favorite games of the year were. Before we begin, a few rules. Release dates at the time were very different between regions, and for this list I went entirely off US release dates. Games exclusive to certain regions of course don't adhere to this rule and instead go off the release date of whatever region they were made in, however ports do adhere to it. So something like Live a Live counts for the purpose of this list, but Mortal Kombat 2 doesn't qualify since only its console ports came out in 94. The original game came out some other year, I guess. I haven't played every game from 1994, of course, and not even every relevant game, so here's a list of games I haven't played that some of you may have expected to see on this list, and may have had a good chance if I'd actually had the chance to play them. Urban Strike, Earthworm Jim, Super Return of the Jedi, Ghoul Patrol, Breath of Fire, Star Tropics 2, Super Bomberman 2, Art of Fighting 2, Doom 2, Echo Tides of Time, Ken Griffey Jr. Presents Major League Baseball, Alien vs. Predator, Fire Emblem 3, Beyond Oasis, Phantasy Star 4, Wario Land, X-Men Children of the Atom, and System Shock. Some of those I could have played, but unfortunately I didn't have enough time this year to get to some of them, nor the foresight. Rest assured though, I did do my research for this. I then wrote an entire freaking rant about NSO being bad, which I'll probably just put on screen here since I have 4 days to edit this. Quick honorable mentions before we get started. First to Final Fantasy VI. I would have loved to give this game more of a shot to make it on the list, but I don't own it. I was able to sample it for a bit and can see what makes it stand out so well. Unfortunately, it couldn't make the list. But I can always get a physical copy. Okay buddy, point made. Now for games I actually played a good bit of for this list that didn't make it, Mega Man World 5 is one I tried to get into. For a Game Boy game, its ambition to do something new and unique with an upscaled presentation is beyond admirable. Despite that, I just couldn't quite get into this one. The level design is good on paper, but I couldn't get behind Mega Man Controlled. The jump is a bit too committed, feeling more like Kid Icarus than Mega Man, and the levels don't always properly account for it. That alongside of it not feeling like it had a good arc made this one a bit frustrating to play. Giving myself a week to record all the NSO footage really wasn't a good idea, so if I played this one without looming time constraints then maybe I'd enjoy it more. This is one I'll go back to, maybe after getting a physical copy. I feel broke just looking at that. Wario's Woods is a game I played off camera as a joke to my younger brother, but we both ended up actually having a lot of fun with it. The game's sense of puzzle solving is very interesting to say the least. There's something really fun and satisfying about the controls and how you eventually learn to anticipate them. When you mess up, not only is it your fault, it also leads to some of the funniest scrambles I've seen in a game like this. I didn't expect to genuinely enjoy and recommend this game, but I sure am. You have to give some credit to the very last Nintendo game on the NES. One time I almost beat that Lion King game, granted it was a slightly easier Genesis version. I can't get footage of it because it was part of the Great Genesis Purge I performed a month or 2 ago. You can say the difficulty is unwarranted, but seriously, why not? This game would be entirely forgotten if not for how brutal it is. It's not even hard due to bad controls or design. It genuinely is a pretty good game, all things considered. It also follows the movie well down to including some scenes cut from the film. Anyway, the 8th level is stupid hard and stopped me from beating it. Sonic Triple Trouble is a Game Gear game so good that it actually beats out half the Genesis games in my opinion. The very layered level design actually very well replicate what 2 and especially 3 do so well. There aren't even any bad zones, they're all at least good. The blend between exploration and speed is as good as you'd want it to be, and the game has some very standout set pieces and idea. It's one of my favorite looking 8-bit games too, and it also introduced Fang the Sniper, who's one of my favorite Sonic characters. This game is so unreasonably good, and that's a belief system I will back up any day of the week. It's on Gems Collection and Oranges Plus. I'm sure it's also darn easy to emulate. Of all the games I'm going to talk about, this is probably the one that has the greatest mix of least people who've played it, but absolutely should be playing. It's a great time, there are just other games that were higher quality overall. Final honorable mention, Castlevania Bloodlines. Thanks to Epic Games for doing us a service and making the Anniversary Collection free so I could actually play this one. This game's attention to set piece and visual design is immaculate, and it has that deliberate, almost puzzle-like stiffness to its action that I loved in Castlevania 3, but just a bit faster, a bit more mobile to add some flavor. If I had the time to sink my teeth into this one just a bit more, in all honesty it's not something I always have the patience for, it easily could have warranted a spot on this list. I think that should be it for the preliminaries, so it's time to get this list started. These are the best games of 30 years ago today. NBA Jam Tournament Edition, out of all the games on this list, is probably the one I've played the least overall, and it's also one of the two I don't actually have footage of. Part of that's because I actually got to play this one in arcades, but because of all that, I'll try to keep this segment relatively brief. I love when sports games aren't just straight simulations of the actual sport, but dare to be something much sillier. This is one of the first games that proved that you can invest me in a wacky sports game without resorting to putting Mario on the cover. The controls are simple on paper, but allow for enough nuance and strategy to make for some wacky shenanigans to unfold with ridiculous maneuvers and slam dunks to paralyze your opponent in complete shock as they proceed to ask how you actually did any of that. Even if you don't quite reach the peaks of what this game allows you, the base mechanics are still more than enough to treat it as a fun competitive game with others. One of the benefits of being an arcade title, everything is super intuitive. Making and blocking shots and how the turbo meter changes your strategy are easy to understand while having depth that separates player skill. The play is fast, there's always something in motion happening that you need to pay attention to, so no matter what, you're getting some of the energy and entertainment that made this game so beloved. This is truly one of the best sports games ever made, because its entire focus is on something that sports games usually don't focus on enough, simply being fun. Donkey Kong Country is actually the best-selling game of 1994, an impressive feat considering the home ports of NBA Jam came out, and despite mass appeal and being released on 4 consoles instead of just one, everyone really just needed that donkey in their lives. I played the GBA version earlier this year, but I honestly prefer the original SNES version due to not being bloated with pointless new minigames and collectibles, and for having the better presentation and feel. The presentation itself hasn't aged a bit in the last 30 years, and it probably never will. It's still very impressive to this day. I look at these visuals in awe, they're so detailed and animate so smoothly without sacrificing a bit of performance. The soundtrack is one of the most famously great parts of the game and may just be my favorite aspect personally. Nothing is as powerful as, say, a Stickerbush Symphony from the sequel, but they still create an immaculate atmosphere. No platform of that time really does it quite as well as this game. You feel every location you're in. It was also cool to see how the ideas of this game would go on to inspire other great games like Crash Bandicoot. The game itself, of course, is also really fun. I find it confusing when people say that the controls or feel are the only thing separating a Mario fan from getting into Donkey Kong, because this game feels genuinely similar and even better to me. The weight is a bit more pronounced, which gives jumping around and bouncing off enemies a good rhythm. Not so much as to be off-putting, but enough to give some preference and identity. The levels themselves feel pretty similar to Mario 3, where they have a central focusing point, get as much out of it as they can, and then move on in a concise yet rather dense stage. These stages can be filled with multiple paths and always have a bunch of things to collect with the KONG letters, and the secret rooms that are only sometimes hidden in dumb ways. I feel that some of these locations were pushing it with what could be reasonably expected, but there is something of an intuition to how this game hides secrets and how you can try and find it. Dense yet quick levels let the game have a lot of variety and ideas, not only stuff like Stop and Go Station or level where you take advantage of the speed boost of barreling into an enemy, but also the minecart levels, which I find to be fun and effective difficulty jump. I'd say that my biggest issue with this game is that occasionally can be a bit annoying. Some secrets are hidden behind actions that otherwise kill you, the roll being on the same button as running and then putting you at a dead stop is very counterintuitive and can lead to deaths that don't feel completely justified, and the amount of time this game spawns enemies in the air off screen who ambush you without much of a chance to fight back if you had too much speed going is genuinely insulting. I swear, if they had less of this, then this game could easily jump up like 4 slots. Aside from those gripes, this is a great game with still a lot to appreciate to this day. Streets of Rage 3 is an interesting point in the series where it's after the peak of the initial run but before the revival that brought the series to a new peak. That's by no means an insult given that Streets of Rage 2 and 4 are 2 of the greatest beat-em-ups of all time, but being sandwiched between them kind of leaves 3 in an interesting place where I don't think it's gotten the credit it quite deserves, because in some ways I think this game is even better than 2. More so than any other game in the genre from the era, this game feels closer to a hectic and fast action games, at times similar to Kingdom Hearts or DMC, giving everyone the ability to run edge to the already great pacing as as well as giving dash attacks, which are another great option to have in fights. Dodge rolling helps create even more chaotic scrambles that the prior games just couldn't have as much due to their relatively low mobility. All of that gives this game an excellent feel to its control. Everything from movement options to something like landing grabs feels tight and responsive. The jump in particular feels great with just the right amount of weight to it. It's not too committed, but neither is it too controlled. Tying the special moves to recharging meter allows you to get more use out of them without sacrificing health. Instead, having health loss be only a punishment and disincentive for overusing them makes them the most prominent they've ever been in the series up to this point. More than ever, using them effectively is how you deal with bosses and even hordes of enemies, which you'll need to get good at managing because this game is hard. Semi-rare case where the American version is even harder than the Japanese. This is by no means just a button masher. You need to be focused on how enemies approach, which ones are coming, and your meter so you can blast them away without losing health. Or you need to try and get them all on one side of the screen to take them out more safely. Otherwise, you will be interrupted and punished. Having every combat encounter be this engaging keeps the pacing high, along with the brief momentary gimmicks that never go on too long to distract from the point of the stage and complements the main gameplay very well. The only thing I could really complain about is that the bosses are a bit too reliant on abusing your iframes on your supers, and in this section here it really isn't explained that you have to hit the vehicle to stop it. And of course the loss of max into character selection is sorely missed. Although as soon as they let you play as the Kangaroo, all is immediately forgiven. The visuals and music are great as to be expected, but even then I feel this game has really tried its hardest to bring them to a new level of polish. That's what I was talking about in the intro. Everything about the craft has just been stepped up immensely from what we'd come to expect prior. The ambition is evident, and I feel that particularly with this game. While weird, I do also like the color palette changes into Western release. I think Axel's yellow shirt and Skate's new blue and red color scheme are even better than their original colors. Classic beat-em-ups as a whole are a genre that have really grown on me over the past year or two, and Streets of Rage 3 is one of the best. While 2 is more iconic and fondly remembered, I think I might prefer 3 overall. One of the best parts of beginning to put this list together was realizing that I could finally get a chance to play Dynamite Headdy again. This is one of the games I tried on the Genesis Collection years ago and really enjoyed, but haven't given myself a chance to go back to until now. This is the one that I'm not even sure many have tried, but it's absolutely great. The safe play aesthetic is really charming and the game goes all out with it. Seeing every element of the level and background just being an elaborate set for the play gives the game a very unique look. Very few games from this time commit to a visual quite like this one. The character design and voice clips add to the oddball charm of this game. I can't believe that Headdy isn't more respected as a mascot. I mean, look at this guy, he's adorable. Creativity doesn't end there, in fact it really doesn't seem to at all. Everything about this game has an air of imagination or ambition to its execution. As soon as I saw this Genesis game have a 3D platforming segment that actually reads properly to the player and remains consistent with its changing perspectives and creates challenges unique to it, I knew that something was special about this game. The overall level design is really fun, even not when relying on gimmicks like that. The moveset you have to work with is surprisingly robust and opens up some exploration and a really effective skill ceiling. The way the attack works is really interesting because you can hit faster at close range while risking the inability to move if an attack shows up. There's also a risk to throwing out an attack without hitting because you can't move during it. You consequently have to pay attention to your range and position, which makes the already well-designed boss fights a lot more fun. The fact that the game also signals how to attack certain bosses also eliminates the element of guesswork that some bosses suffer from, especially from this time period. This game is overall very well polished for its time. From the callouts it serves you for legibility, to the unique heads for each of the power-ups, to committed visual style, it's great animation, and a very fun and upbeat music. I didn't actually finish this one, I really wasn't even that close, because it's pretty tricky, especially some of the bosses, and if you get a game over, then it's straight back to the title screen. Despite not having seen all of it, I know a great platform when I see it, and Dynamite Headdy, much like the studio who made it, is an absolute treasure. Mega Man 6 is the other game I can't get footage of unless you want off-screen recorded crap again. Also, yes, this game did actually come out in '94 in the US, you don't need to fact check me. Anyways, I don't think I actually need to explain why this game is good. The entire fanbase has basically entirely come around on the second NES trilogy, which this game is clearly the best of. The aesthetics are at an all-time high for the series and system. The around-the-world theming gives the most location variety in the series, arguably to this day. The level design is super well made throughout, rush adapters are awesome, and give the game a slight bit more route planning and a lot more opportunities for exploration into levels. Most of the special weapons are actually good, unlike what the propaganda told you. Overall, this game is very good, very cool, and you should go play it. Super Turbo is awesome. For how early this was in the fighting game timeline, the fact that this game is so high quality and content complete is kind of a miracle. 17 unique characters with very fun, complete, and diverse movesets, with 16 having alternate forms from the previous game that can give trade-offs based off the mechanics that they do or don't adhere to. That alone is worthy of praise, and if that's not enough for you, this game also gave us Akuma, and the trauma of fighting him, and the deeper trauma of not getting the code to place him correct. While not all the most viable per se, I do think all the characters are fun, and they're diverse enough to where you'll find one that you'll gravitate to. I personally have my favorites, but I also have a lot of fun trying all of them out. The movesets are very distinct and well designed despite the imbalances. Compared to other Street Fighter II games, this one stands out because it brought together the best mechanics and attributes of the prior games while still even adding new ones. You have the speed and challenge that made many prefer hyper fighting, but also the refined visuals and new characters of Super. The super meters are also an absolute game changer and change the way you play neutral and opens up new combo routes. Teching off throws would become a staple of the genre, and this game revolutionized doing the most cryptic yet unreasonably difficult stuff to get a secret fight. I love the pick up and play nature of this game, the immediate appeal of all these great characters, with the substance and depth to keep you coming back and having fun with others. There may be a number of issues. The interpreting, for instance, is too strict. I have lost way too many fights due to Hadokens getting misread as jumps. The arcade mode AI is definitely overtuned. I spent over 20 minutes beating the first opponent because he was pulling out the Evo combos, tech reversals, and then doing the super in the air somehow, and then when I finally won, it was somehow with Zangief, and then the opponent Zangief, I really don't know what he was doing. That's the frame perfect mashing he has there. I have some major flaws with this game compared to others on the list, but there's still so much to love, even if it's more flawed moments. There's a reason this is the oldest fighting game with a genuine competitive scene. Not just because it was huge for its time, but because it's still really fun today. Sitting down to play this with friends or family is always a great time. On top of that, I think this game's presentation is amazing and underrated. The sprite and animations are great and detailed, and the music is phenomenal. This is a game that will always have a spot among the best of the genre. I didn't even know Live a Live came out in '94 until researching for this list. I've owned the remake for a while now, and this was the perfect excuse to finally give it a shot. Because of the fact I'm playing an enhanced version, I'll try to keep my compliments focused more than ever on the core design and narrative, because that's what was there in 1994. Even though the remake looks stunning courtesy of the HD 2D art style, the original is by no means a bad looking game, far from it. It takes a lot of commitment to use all these different visual styles in one game that looks cohesive across its different chapters. Live a Live is not a traditionally structured RPG by any means. It's split into 7 different scenarios taking place in vastly different time periods with some very different tones and themes. It's like a collection of short stories, and this one is so well executed because the focus is more than ever on the emotion and characters than anything else. This leads to scenes so heartrending, charming, jovial, hopeful, any range of emotions this game covers. Even though each campaign is only about 1 to 3 hours long, you latch onto the characters and stories, giving this game such a rich cast to work with and a varied set of ideas. It makes for the rare RPG you can just pick up and get into without worry of being overly drawn out, or having to commit to finishing one overarching story that you can lose track of if you stop playing for a time that can take up to 30 hours. Focus and concise delivery is what this game excels at, which is something this genre could sometimes use more of. The combat system is very unique, somehow blending elements of traditional turn-based combat with elements of action and strategy RPGs, making you think more about the positioning of yourself and enemies and working around the ranges of you and any enemy attacks and even auto counters. This all makes for some of the most fun the ATB system has ever been. From there, every chapter then adds on its own unique additional twist to the overall gameplay and structure. The real-time management in the Wild West, the morality in multiple paths in Edo, Japan, and Distant Future has a drastic tone shift halfway through that I absolutely will not spoil what happens. There are so many ideas gone through that give this game a near never-ending sense of wonder and surprise. There are some issues with some ideas not being fleshed out enough in a single playthrough because of how short each campaign is. While that can make some aspects of the game feel undercooked, especially in the Edo Japan story arc, which as a whole has a lot of questionable elements that make me not quite give this game a 10 out of 10, that really doesn't take away from what is one of the most ambitious RPGs I've ever played. Live a Live really is something special. A game that begs for hours of discussion of its themes, characters, and gameplay ideas, a full discussion of which being far outside the scope of this segment. Of all the games on this list, this is the one I want to review on its own the most. This was the literal last possible addition to the list, and I'm glad I finally got to play it. Mega Man X is a weird case where it came out so early in the year that many forgot it even released in '94, combining that with the release date in Japan being late '93. That said, while I like X2 more, do I really have to explain why Mega Man X is a fantastic game? I honestly find myself more impressed by the design with each playthrough, and this is a game I've played quite a few times. In order to stand out from the other Mega Man games released in the same year, X had to be something unique and jaw-dropping, which I find it did very well. The new X series innovations like dashing, wall jumping, and the vast array of upgrades are all here in this game, and at some of their best they'd be in the whole series. Even going past that, these are some well-made stages. The only one I'd say I didn't like in comparison to the others is Sigma Palace 3, but even that one has some really fun and memorable moments. With great main stages and the surprisingly great overall Sigma Palace stages that nail the feeling of making you feel unstoppable and tearing through them with a full arsenal, this game is a well-designed platformer that does a lot in a somewhat short runtime. It feels like every stage will take an opportunity for a cool or memorable bit of platforming or an interesting set piece. It overall benefits the pacing that is already some of the best of any platformer of the era. The bosses themselves are really great. The Spark Mandrill syndrome really kicked in with this game, sure, but fighting these bosses Buster only gives them a layer of depth you just wouldn't see otherwise. Honest, Buster only, some of these are some of the best fights in the whole series. My only real big issue with Mega Man X is, while making the dash lock to one of the stages ensures classic Mega Man fans can jump in and have time to adjust before they kick up the speed, it also kinda locks your route to basically always begin with Chill Penguin if you want to play any degree of efficiently. That's honestly pretty minor given how many other ways there are to change up your route, some being exclusive to this game. Instead of prioritizing easier stages or maybe a decent weapon, now you're thinking about the best upgrades and what boss order can get them all with minimal backtracking. A few stages being altered by what you've already completed makes you think more than ever about your exact order. This encourages exploration and experimentation within each stage and within your route. I also really like the story of this game. X's character is probably at its best across the entire series. He's really sympathetic and reserved for how powerful he's said to be and eventually would become. I feel it leads directly into the great ending. Zero and Vile are great glimpses of what X will become, being a great example of how the story motivates and works into the gameplay. And of course, how could I go this long without mentioning the best soundtrack of the 16-bit era? I think I genuinely mean that. It's so easy to see how, even with 7 sequels following it, Mega Man X is still widely considered to be the best of its series, and to many, even the best Mega Man game of all time. I personally don't agree, but that doesn't mean I love this game any less. And as this playthrough has proved, I love it even more every time I play it. It's the first entry on this list to get that delicious and nutritious 10 out of 10. Given that I'm such a huge fan of the series, it may seem surprising that I haven't played Sonic 3 and Knuckles at all until this year. I was thankfully able to wait for the perfect experience of being able to stack the game on top of itself. Yeah, I played and recorded this on original hardware being put through an upscaler, thus why the footage looks like crap. Somehow, as two separate games, there are flaws I could point out, but put together, this becomes one of the most special games of the generation. The visuals are fantastic. I love the added detail to the sprites, and these backgrounds often surprised me by how good they were. Also, forget what I said about Mega Man X's music, this might be the best soundtrack of the generation. Not just great because some of it was made by Michael Jackson himself, nor is it because this was the first game Jun Seno composed for. They managed to use the perceived weaknesses of the Genesis sound font to deliver excellent tones and rhythms using some unconventional sounds to bolster its appeal. And the rhythm doesn't stop there. Even this game's worst zones have such a rhythm to their level design. The sequence of jumps interacting with your current momentum and the terrain, combining with the level gimmicks and varied sense of direction, makes for some of the best levels in the entire series. Again, even the weaker stages like Marble Garden, Carnival Night, and Sandopolis adhere to these design principles. The scale of the stages makes them so much better. There's a scale Genesis games like to have to their level design, and this game takes it to the absolute extreme. There are so many different routes intertwining in so many different ways. These levels are huge with numerous ways to get through them, which gives the player the freedom to play however they feel like. Speed isn't an absolute, and isn't an inevitability, nor is it the only component that matters. If you're playing for speed, then you have to earn it. Climbing up to the top roofs giving the cathartic payoff of flying through the levels at a speed never before seen. Conversely, exploring the stages is also extremely compelling. The special rings are the best special stage system in the series and are very well hidden, and the special stages themselves are great. Helping it all is that Sonic's control has been perfected. The weight feels amazing. There's a reason nearly every other 2D Sonic game either tries to replicate this game's feel, or is crap. The game design is fantastic, but what really elevates this game is the scope, the attention to detail that they didn't need to pay attention to, the story integrating directly into gameplay, the way each zone naturally segues into another, the way they build up to the excellent climax with minimal cutscenes. Sky Sanctuary is the perfect example. It's a really fun and well-made zone on its own, although consider the way it's set up and presented. That's what makes this go from a fantastic game to something truly special and memorable. The game's set pieces are fantastic, whether they be more automated like the snowboard or more gameplay based. As a fan of the series, I've obviously heard for years that this is the best Sonic game. I certainly agree that it is one of the best, top 3 for sure. Although in this year specifically, there's one game that I found even better. From the moment I began putting this list together, I knew this game would be number 1. It'd be a Herculean task to overtake it. Not even some of the best Mega Man games or one of the best Sonic games ever released could defeat what may just be the single most influential video game of this entire generation, and one of the most fun too. Super Metroid deserves a spot in history for what it's done to the modern indie scene alone, and another just for its speedrunning influence. But all of that aside, what's at its core is a largely mature, atmospheric, smartly made, and incredibly fun exploration-based experience that defined what this type of game could and should be. The opening is so well made that this relatively uninvolved part of the playing experience still leaves so much to analyze in what it adds to the game as an experience overall. This, and when you finally land on Zebes, are some of the most immersed I've been in any game of this generation. The sound design and incredible visuals make way for the rest of the game, which is super well paced. As soon as your arsenal seems a bit dull, then you can access a new weapon or expansion that pushes the combat or movement forward. It knows when to invisibly guide you along and knows when to set you free. The way the map opens up over time gives a perfect balance of open-ended decision making and making sure that there isn't too much to where the player gets lost, but it does give you enough to feel overwhelmed in an exciting way that makes you wonder what you're gonna do next. Every upgrade adds something new, every boss is fun, every area has some little intricacy to it. They are so well designed to make just moving around a treat of its own and make finding new upgrades in areas such a fluid experience overall. It's all divided so well that small areas of larger areas become memorable and keep your sense of direction in check and keep the pacing moving forward. The way this game conveys everything about itself almost entirely without words, just through context to the world, makes Zebes feel alive. So not only does the immaculately structured world let player agency and route flourish make the game endlessly replayable, the detail and charming oddities make it a game you'd want to go back to. The controls may seem unwieldy at first, but the more you play the better it feels. There's such an element of mastery to the field, be it intentional or not. This is one of the few games where I've been able to learn legitimate speedrunning strategies, and it doesn't feel out of place given the game's open-ended nature. There's a lot of discussion of what the best NES game to me, and of course it always ends up going to this game. For me personally, I feel that this very well may just be my favorite SNES game, if not favorite game of the generation. I could go on for much longer into far more detail, but I feel like my points have been made. Super Metroid has been one of my favorite games of all time since I first played it, and that's a title it only reaffirms for itself the more I play it. I can say with zero nostalgic connection that this is my favorite game released in 1994. I hope you enjoyed this list, maybe found a new game to play you've never heard of, or maybe rediscovered something you used to enjoy. This was such a huge project for me, and I had a lot of fun getting it all together. As someone who's wanted to make videos for a long time, I've had some pretty out there ideas that you don't really get many chances to present with the impact you'd initially conceive them with. But now that I make videos, this is an idea that popped up that I just realized I could go for. An anniversary like this doesn't happen often. 30 years, it's a huge milestone for works of entertainment like this. This was something I knew I was passionate about putting together, and I really wanted that to show, and I hope it did and was enjoyable. If this video comes out the day it's intended to, December 23rd, it is my birthday as it's being uploaded. I really am excited for what I'm going to be doing with this channel in the future. This is basically just becoming an outlet for me to say or do whatever I just feel like presenting. And the fact that people are willing to entertain that as entertainment, I think that's a really special thing. I hope you're looking forward to what I'm doing in the future, and I hope you have a great Christmas.